We started in on watch because we had an expertise in maps and internet mapping in particular that didn't exist in the commercial world and certainly didn't exist in the law enforcement world. Fuelman was a company that provided fuel to fleets. So the drivers needed maps to figure out where the stations were. And we figured out first how to print the maps and then how to put them on the internet so the drivers could get information about where to fuel their trucks. It turned out that Fuelman had quite a few law enforcement clients. They needed help mapping offenders, knowing where they were, being able to educate the public about where these offenders were in your neighborhood. And we came up with Offender Watch. I was attracted to it as a business, but also as the idea that we could do something good for the community.
We have a saying at Watch Systems that it's not just software, it's service, and it's the people behind it. You know, the software is only a small part of what we do. The employees we have are dedicated. The reward of knowing that you have saved one child, one person from being a victim of a sex offense is very, very, very motivating.
You got to believe that at some point in time, with all this has gone on in the last few years, some kid did not get abused because they at least knew to stay away from the guy.
Outreach to the public is a very, very important thing. In fact, when Lou and I first came up with the idea of sending an email, and Lou says, well, that's a good idea. I said, hey, you know, we have maps. Maybe we could send it just based on a radial around the office. And that was the real genesis behind sending emails. And that was 14 years ago that we came up with this idea of let's notify the public.
So we decided to put the two together and decided that we could provide a map and an ability for a person to get emailed about offenders just around them. Rather than try to deal with the entirety of there are hundreds of offenders in my county and how am I going to keep track of all of them. If you could boil it down, well, there's only 3 or 4 or 5 maybe in my neighborhood. That you can deal with, and that you can show your kids and say, you see this guy? Stay away from him.
And that was 14 years ago that we came up with this idea of let's notify the public. And we're very, very focused on helping agencies develop methods of creating greater amounts of community awareness.
We believe that the message needs to come directly from law enforcement. We see ourselves as not a replacement for law enforcement, but an assistant to.
When Lou and I first started, the idea of one agency sharing their information with another was a very foreign idea. Use of the internet back then was not even prevalent. Most offices didn't have an email, and here we were developing an internet-based software program. The idea of connecting agencies together is a very, very, what most people would consider to be a very simple thing. But in actuality, it's very, very difficult. You know, at 9/11, people were talking about why didn't we share information from one jurisdiction to the next? And so, in order to share information, you got to be communicating and connected with each other. And so it's very, very satisfying that once you connect people together, you can share information together. And the more that collaboration that goes on, the more information you collect. And that just perpetuates the whole exchange, that cycle.
At some point, the ability to network the information becomes even more important than how you use the product yourself. And that's where we've hit it. We've got so much connected now that the ability to get information from one county to another county or from one state to another state has become as important as how you use it on each individual agency. Generally speaking, it's difficult for different jurisdictions to share information. They all have their own systems, and there isn't a built-in mechanism for them to track a guy from one space to another. Particularly from state to state, there isn't a great mechanism in place to say, you're supposed to be moving to New York, here in New York, make sure you pick it up. We already were in that county in New York and that county in Ohio, so we already had those two guys connected where they wouldn't have normally been connected. And we just leveraged that and built on it and said, now how can we help these guys communicate?
I love the idea of multi-jurisdiction collaboration.
Well, the jurisdictional sharing is amazing. For the state of Washington, when offenders move, it's really easy for the coordinators in the various counties to communicate with each other and to transfer that data, to import the record into their system and take over the ownership of that offender. What's really been nice, though, is by bringing the tribes, some of the tribes on board, and we continue to work at assisting them, is for the tribes, they're technically a foreign sovereign. They're another country. And so having that ability for them to share records of tribal convictions that they were not able to share before, having the ability for the tribes to obtain records that they couldn't necessarily get from the counties has really opened the doors for communication. We've seen some of the tribal-state relations have just blossomed because of that ability for both agencies to communicate where they couldn't communicate before. So we're really pleased with the integration of Offender Watch in our tribes. Offender Watch copied the county's records over. Turns out the tribe had a guy living on the reservation that the county was not aware was living on the reservation. He's a level 3 sex offender, so he's high risk. The tribe is trying to register the guy. The county didn't know he was on the reservation, and because the tribe finally got that information, they were able to call the county and say, this individual's living on the reservation, he's non-native, so we don't have the criminal jurisdiction over him. We've notified the marshals because we've put a criminal case out on him, and so the county also issued a warrant, and that wouldn't have happened 6 months ago. And it wasn't that the tribe and the county didn't have a good working relationship, just the access to that record wasn't there. I can tell you that in Soton County, their counterpart in Idaho, in Natchez County, they actually will come to our conference, our statewide conference, and participate because their information sharing is so good between the two jurisdictions across the river.
It's just amazing the interagency cooperation we now have with Offender Watch. My agency is probably the largest police agency in the area, so a lot of the small agencies look upon the information that we provide in Offender Watch, and it enables us to communicate effectively with other police agencies, which was very complicated before we actually got it. Well, just recently we had a situation where we had an offender who moved from the state of Washington. He was actually considered, I guess, an absconder from the state of Washington. He came into our agency and we put his information in. We got notification from the state of Washington that they actually had a warrant on him for leaving that state. And he was also an offender that was wanted in Canada. And so we were able to obtain that information from that state of Washington. We were able to bring that offender in and actually had him indicted. If that information was not put into Offender Watch, we would have never got that notification from the state of Washington that he was wanted. So it just streamlines the entire process and allows me to search out information just in a blip of a search of a person's name instead of going through files and files and files of looking for stuff. And I can't stress enough about the mapping system which we use in a rape that occurred in the city. I was able to put this offender, all the offenders who reside in that particular area, and actually print out a map to provide to our Central Intelligence Unit, which was very helpful. They were able to go and interview these certain offenders where these events occurred by just looking at the physical map and the radius of where all these offenders live. And it ended up with a successful prosecution of a rapist that occurred.
Every time you passed one thing to another guy and they re-entered it or did something with it, you had about a 10% error rate. So the more you passed that paper around, the less likely it was to be the correct thing that you were trying to get in the first place. Capture it once electronically, not have it re-entered then by somebody at a state level or a federal level.
And that's how you get to the most important part, which is one and only one offender record.
When we did the long form, the registration form, sometimes you couldn't read those people's handwriting. We would get one thing from the sheriff's office saying South Broad Street, and then from the probation and parole agent, they would say Broad Street. So which one was correct? A lot of times we would have both in there. And I remember the first program we used, which was not Offender Watch, more than one person couldn't even be in the same offender's record, which that is definitely a big change. You know, you can be talking to someone on the phone to the sheriff's office or whoever, and we can all be in the same record, looking at it together, updating it at the same time. And I remember if you would type in someone's name that another analyst was looking at, it would block you out.
The offenders were being registered by the county sheriffs, and the paperwork was coming to us, and we were having to actually do the data entry. So it was very time-consuming and not very accurate, because you're having to interpret people's writing. You're having to interpret what this says. Our project manager is awesome for any questions we have or how to use this, because then he'll give me examples of how other states are doing it. I just think that this is an overall wonderful system, just because everybody is on the same page. Everybody is on the same level for communication, for searching, for sharing. Information sharing is one of the best aspects of this program, and I would recommend it to anybody.
So it was a little challenging with the current platform we was on. The database that we were using is so antiquated that we thought it would be very difficult. The ease of the transfer of data was surprisingly fluid. On a Friday, we stopped using our current database, and on a Monday, we were up and running. 24-hour tech support is great for agencies that work 24 hours a day. We register sex offenders during business hours. However, the other 50% of offender watch is the investigative tool, and that's a 24-hour operation. Our sex offense unit had a string of rapes that occurred within Baltimore, and all of the victims commented that there was a Jamaican accent. One of my detectives 5 years ago entered into our old database an investigative note that the offender was going to Jamaica to visit his family for the week. When the data was imported over, of course, everything was brought over, even the investigative notes and the narrative portion. The free text search of Jamaica and Jamaican produced one offender, and they were able to identify his roommate. But without that free text search, we would have never been able to close that case and get a conviction on a multiple rape suspect.
When the offender moves from one county to the other, it's huge for the sheriff's departments, especially at the local level. They can manage the offenders a lot better, and I think that we're probably going to find that we're not going to lose offenders in the cracks as much as what we have in the past. It's not only huge for the state, at the state level, for Wyoming, but we want to get everybody's ideas and pull them together. And what people are doing that works, we want to do it. So for us, that's a huge resource. It's a huge networking tool. And the more states that jump on board, the better it's going to be in the overall management of sex offenders.
The difference is that every field is searchable. That's one of the biggest pluses for us, is that if you get someone, call for an offender that's got a red truck and he was a white guy about 30 years old, you can plug those three things in and search the database. You can narrow it down by a responsibility or a zone to narrow your search, from a statewide search to just that specific county, or expand it out to a couple counties. And the and/or search is just a wonderful feature for whether you're looking for a guy that is there or looking for kind of an unknown suspect that could be in the database. It's rectified some of our people that we've been looking for. And several weeks ago, my partner and I went to pick a guy up, been missing for 14 years, but he was registered down in South Carolina, and we found him in Offender Watch. So it's a good way to find our missing people sometimes. The technical support is phenomenal. They're quick to respond to any technical difficulties, and one of the best things is that we have not been charged any additional fees, any change fees. It's all come within the contract that we originally signed, so it's been a great partnership to work with Watch Systems.
One of the first things we did was try to get our product in Louisiana. It's our home state, and we started talking to them about how we could help them with what they were doing, and they said, our biggest problem is these mailings. It used to take them a week and a half to just get it ready to go and try to figure out who's the right people to send it to. Well, we came in and automated all that, and now what took a week and a half, we can have done in 2 days, but their part of it is about 5 minutes. They go in and put an address in, and it calculates, spins on, and so we've taken a law enforcement time, a deputy's time, down from a week and a half to 5 minutes. And that's significant efficiency. And we do all that for the cost of a first-class stamp. So they're not paying any more than they were before.
The gold standard for offender management and notification programs in America. Offender Watch. We make sure your data is on the map.